from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 2038. Could you survive like your ancestors? Oh, it's a fantabulous Friday. So I figured, why not have a look at some things that how our ancestors lived compared to how we live today? Could you survive in their times? Could they survive in our times? Now, there's an interesting way to look at things. So our question for you is, if you were suddenly transported back to the 1800s or early 1900s, could you survive without modern conveniences? What skill would be the hardest for you to learn? Now, I got this idea because I occasionally sit down and just scroll through TikTok and Instagram Reels and all that sort of stuff. And there's always really fun ones in there where a parent will hand their child something from the 1980s, before computers, before cell phones and all of that, and say, operate this. And it's always fun watching the kids trying to figure it out. And there's one guy who, sorry, I got something stuck in my teeth. Kind of annoying. Nope, we got it. We're good. All right. So there's this one guy who has this daughter, and he'll suddenly go up to her and he will give her some phrase from some movie or some TV show from the 80s into the 90s, and just keep repeating it until she gets it. And then she's like, "This is one of those shows, isn't it?" And he goes, "Yep." And you can see the wheels turning. It's absolutely fantastic. Like, somebody even donated to them a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which, those that haven't seen it, is like 20-something volumes of a book, and told her to look up certain things. And he says, no, and she goes to pick up a phone and goes, no, not on the phone. You've got to use what we use, which was these books of encyclopedia that you had to look up in. And so she's kind of like looking at the spine, because he's got them all spine up, all in order and everything else, and figuring it. I tell you, it is so endearing to watch these parents who are teaching these kids of modern technology stuff that we as Gen Xers grew up with. I'm using that Gen X thing, and even those in the what do they call them? The silent generation, the baby boomers, which I think is now known as the silent generation. Not 100% sure on that one, but anyway, the generation before Gen X, even some of them are having fun watching the younger generation trying to figure out how to use things from back in the day. There was a really cool TikTok one. I love this one. I thought it was ingenious. And the guy said, the kids wanted me to create them an escape room. So he wrote all the instructions in cursive. He had a TV in there with no remote control. He had a dial-up phone, a rotary dial phone, and another couple of other things that would all help them escape from this room. He's sitting outside with his feet up on the wall there saying, yep, they've been in there 3 hours. I thought that was brilliant. I thought that's going to stomp any kid. And even some of the Gen Xers says, we're going to take back the world. We're going to write. That's all we need to do is just write everything in cursive, and they won't have a clue, and we can just walk in and take things over. So with that in mind, start thinking about some of the things that have come around in your generation. Like, being a Gen X, we were outside until the lights came. Basically, the time we had to go home was when the lights came on. Or if your mother stood, like in my case in New Zealand, if your mother stood on the front porch and bellowed, that was your call to come home. You always had to be in hearing distance of the house. We just basically said, we're going over to so-and-so's place. Yep, not a problem. Off you go, that sort of thing. We drank from the garden hose. And if we were hungry, we just went into the garden. We pulled up some vegetables or plucked some fruit off the trees or whatever, washed them under the garden hose, and just ate them. We used to pull up radishes and carrots, and I used to eat celery like it was going out of fashion. I cannot stand the stuff. I can't stand the smell of it, can't stand the taste of it. If it's in any food, it completely ruins it. So I just stay away from anything with celery in it. And yet I used to go into the garden and just like break off stalks and go and wash it under the garden tap and eat it like nobody's business. And that's how we got our snacks, because we weren't allowed in the house. If it wasn't raining, we were outside playing. If it was raining, we could go outside in our swimsuits if we wanted to, if it was warm enough. But, we just rough and tumbled on everything. We didn't have, my parents always said the reason they had kids was to change the channel on the TV. I thought that was brilliant. And then we'd have chores that we had to do, or something to help around the house, like doing some housework doing some housework. We got paid our allowance for it, and somehow I hate cleaning toilets. Toilets was the one I had to do. I had to actually unscrew the toilet seat, take it out into the garage where our tub was, but next to the washing machine, and wash the whole toilet seat thing, dry it all off, and go back and screw it back. After I cleaned the toilet, then screw this toilet seat back on. Yeah, people wonder why I don't like housework these days. But anyway, so those were just some of the things growing up that we had to do. And so let's go back a few more years. Let's leave the 1900s. Well, let's go back to the 1850s. So imagine waking up in 1850, no internet, no coffee maker, no Uber Eats. You start your day at sunrise, and if you want breakfast, you have to milk the cow, grind the grain, and start a fire. Think you could do it? Well, this is going to be fun. I mean, they didn't have alarm clocks, so you had to wake up. It was all those sorts of things. So this is what we're going to be exploring. Some of the things, some of a day in the life of our ancestors based on different time periods. Could you survive? So, like, for example, you had no internet, no fast food, no machines. So a day in the life of your ancestor would look something like this. Number one, the morning routine. No alarm clocks. Roosters, church bells, or the sun woke people up. No quick showers. The water had to be hand pumped, heated over a fire, and used sparingly. And quite often with the bath, everybody in the house would go through that bath water before it was tossed out. Yeah, think about that. And in those days, they had lots of kids. So imagine if you're towards the front of the line of getting to that bathtub, you got the cleaner water. Getting dressed, there was no zippers, no elastic. You had corsets, suspenders, layering of clothing were very common then. And a lot of times you were tied into your clothes. If you think back to some of the movies that took place in like the 1800s and all that, women would be wearing corsets. They literally had somebody that like made that thing as tight as they possibly could, so everything stayed in, and it gave them a beautiful figure. Yeah, getting dressed was not a quick thing. Number two, eating without grocery stores or restaurants. Bread, butter, and cheese were often homemade from scratch. You had your chickens out the back for the eggs. You had your wheat growing out there that you could go and bring it in and grind it. Yeah, I know. No fast food. If you wanted fried chicken, you had to raise, butcher, and cook it. Raise the chicken, butcher it, and cook it for yourself. People ate seasonal foods. No bananas in the wintertime unless you lived near a port. And even in those days, bananas weren't that common to see anyway. Housework was a full-time job. Laundry, you had no washing machines. Clothes, sheets, blankets, everything was scrubbed by hand and then hung on lines to dry. So they were air dried. Cooking, ovens had no temperature dials. You had to feel the heat of a wood fire stove to go, yeah, that feels about right. Keeping warm in the winter, you had to haul in the wood or the coal and keep the fire going all day. And you'd have blankets and shawls and all that to help keep you warm. But if you can get hold of some old family letters or diaries, journals, they often describe daily chores and hardships in detail if you can find some to read. Even look for memoirs and stuff of people who grew up during that time because they will describe some of this. Skills your ancestors had that we've forgotten. Yes, there is some stuff that we don't do now because we've basically forgotten how to do it. Making and repairing everything. You learned to sew, knit, cobble shoes. There was no mass producing of clothing. It was all made by hand. So if your husband needed a shirt, you had to sit down, cut out the pattern, figure out the pattern, cut it all out, and sew all the pieces together by hand. If you needed a new sweater or something, you had to knit it or crochet it. Blacksmithing and carpentry. Many tools and household items were handmade in order to do the job. Food preservation, and cooking from scratch. No refrigerators. Meat was smoked, salted, or stored in ice houses. And then they would have people that would deliver the blocks of ice to keep the ice house cold. You'll be canning, drying, and fermenting were essential to avoid winter food shortages. So when you had the harvest, you then spent days canning some of the harvest so that you would have food supplies during the wintertime. And you always had to make extra in case you had visitors or in case the winter went longer, that sort of thing. So yeah, canning, drying, fermenting, great skills to have. I know of very few people who actually still do that today. And I was thinking, I don't think I've ever canned anything before. Maybe I'll give it a go. I made pickled onions one time. Yeah, we didn't find those till we moved out of the house. Those were some good pickled onions. I couldn't even tell you how long they'd been sitting in that cupboard doing their thing. Remember my parents used to make ginger beer. Oh, that was so good. Homemade ginger beer was awesome. And you had to wait for the raisin to rise from the bottom up to the top, and then you knew it was ready. And my grandmother, she often had preserves, and they had outside, they actually had built a 2-story onto the back of their house, but underneath that 2-story area, they had the garage. Then they had a room that they used kind of as a guest room, but it was mainly my Nana's sewing room. But off that, underneath the stairs, there was a storage area there that was full of canned peaches. I just remember the peaches. There was probably other stuff in there as well. I don't know, but I just remember the peaches because they were really good. So that's, I don't see people doing the canning and the drying, canning the food, dehydrating food and fermenting stuff to keep you through the winter time. I know in some of the northern states they probably do because of the weather that they get up there, but I don't hear of it being done very often, and it's something I've always wanted to do for myself. Anyway, on to other things. Travel and navigation without GPS. People traveled by horse, foot, or early automobiles. No highways or gas stations. Most people didn't have detailed maps. They relied on landmarks or word-of-mouth directions. Can you imagine that? Hey, just go down the road there and you'll see the hill with the single tree on it. Go past that, and about 3 lanes past that, you need to turn left, and there'll be the big golden oak there. So turn left at the big, before you get to the golden oak. If you get to the golden oak, you've gone too far, and then you've got to go up the hill and down the other side, and then up the next hill and down, and halfway down the next side, turn to the right, and the house will be right there. Can you imagine trying to remember details like that to get to a place? First aid and home remedies. No hospitals were nearby. People relied on herbal medicine, poultices, and home treatments. And I will tell you, there's a lot of home remedy books out there that still have valid information in them today. Many women had basic midwifery knowledge because hospitals were rare for childbirth. Usually the childbirth was done at home. They'd have to go collect the midwife, bring her back to the house, or the woman who had the midwifery knowledge, bring them back to the house in order for the baby to be born safely. Men were not allowed in the room at all. They were actually kind of kicked out of the house. And they were told when they could come back and meet their son or daughter, because you didn't know if you were having a boy or a girl until the baby appeared. That was when you found out if you were having a boy or a girl. So they had no ultrasounds, nothing like that. Home births, always home births, because they had no hospitals to take kids to and that sort of thing. Fun fact, a common cold could last weeks without medicine. People often use honey, whiskey, or mustard plasters as home remedies. There you go. Oh, that mustard thing would have stunk to high heaven. What modern now? Let's take this another way. Let's have a look at. Let's have a look at what modern conveniences would our ancestors love or hate. Things they would have loved would have been running water and indoor plumbing. If you wanted water, you had to go to the well, put the bucket down, bring it back up, pour it into the container that you had to then carry back into the house to either heat it up or do whatever you had to do with it. So there'll be no more carrying heavy bucket or go down to the river carrying heavy water buckets. Electricity and light bulbs. Candles and oil lamps were expensive and smoky. And it's what they used to use to light their way. And you'd see them walk around the house with either a lantern or a candlestick holder. Washing machines and dishwashers. Laundry, you had laundry day. It took the entire day to do the laundry. You would start early in the morning with boiling up the water and then hand scrubbing it clean. And you'd have the lye soap to use with it. And then you would have another tub to rinse everything out in, and then you'd go and hang it on all the lines, and then you'd be bringing it in late afternoon once it was all dry. Things they may have hated: fast food and processed meals. Amen to that one. They were used to fresh homemade food. If it was in season, they could pick it directly from the garden and take it directly to the garden to table in a day. I tell you, I still remember to this day the vegetable gardens my parents used to have at different houses we lived at, and going out and picking fresh tomatoes to come back in and have it on freshly made bread. Now it'd be bread we bought from the bakery. And then you slather the butter on and slice up the fresh tomatoes and put that between two slices of fresh bread. And sometimes it may still be a little warm. There's nothing like it. Nothing like it. So they would use fresh homemade food. If they needed meat, they could go kill one of the animals and dress it and cook it and everything else like that. The lack of personal skills. People today don't know how to fix, sew, or build like they did, like your ancestors did. Something needed repairing, and you put out the sewing kit and you would darn a hole in a sock. You would darn a hole in a skirt. Somebody needed to have something taken in. You did it all by hand with a hand needle, a needle that you held in your hand. They didn't have sewing machines. Although I can imagine when sewing machines came out, they were sort of like, oh, this is really cool. It's not going to take me as long now. But would they still go back to the hand skills of, I enjoy hand sewing every now and again. I can sew buttons on, I can put zips in, I can darn socks. It's been a long time since I've darned a sock, but I can still do it. It might take me a little longer than it used to. I still knit and crochet and that sort of thing. I have my sewing machines. I just haven't had anywhere to set them up for a few years. So I have to sell my sewing machines before I head to New Zealand too, because I've got to buy new ones when I get down there. It's going to be fun. But we're going to have a girls' day. There's going to be myself, my mom, and my sister-in-law. We're going to go out together to the craft stores, and they're going to take me to the craft stores because they don't have the big stores that we have here, like Michael's and Hobby Lobby. They don't have those big stores. You have to go to several smaller stores, and some of them are mom and pop stores, some of them are chain stores. And so we're going to go for a walk around there so I can find out where all the where all the craft supplies are, what stores have what, and get myself a sewing machine. And my mum says, what do you need a sewing machine for? I says, to sew clothes and drapes and whatever else I need in the house. Yes, I like to sew. Haven't had a chance to do it, but yeah, I did. So lack of personal skills, not knowing how to fix, sew, or build like they did. Even my dad took Brad under wing, and when my parents came over, when Brad was alive, Dad would work on the daddy do list. I always had to have a daddy do list because if I didn't, he would find stuff to do. And even when he finished the list, I think I'd made a long enough list. No, he'd go find stuff to fix. But he always had Brad tag along with him because Brad was never learned how to use tools. So my dad took it upon himself to teach my husband how to use tools. And very different times. Parents did very different things and weren't very hands-on as far as using tools went. Too much screen time, too much time on the computer, too much fun. They lived outdoors and socialized face-to-face. Seriously, we would, if it wasn't raining, you're outside playing or doing whatever chores outside that needs to be done, helping in the gardens. Neighbors would walk past and you would stop and talk with your neighbors. And that was how the gossip got passed around town as well. You had places that you could congregate, like at the church or at the pub, where the local news was handed around, and you got to meet. So you got to know your neighbors and you got to know the people in your town very, very well because everybody's outside, everybody's moving around, talking to people, getting to know others and all of that. And everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's kids. So if somebody was naughty in church, like this is a funny one. If your parents didn't come to church for that day, but you were sent to church, and they always knew to look out for somebody in the crowd, and they could always tell this person because they always wore a hat. When they didn't see the hat, they was like, yes, she's not here. We can do what we want type of thing. Well, in church and disrupt a little bit, but it always got back to them. Mum, like, how did that happen? Because the hat lady didn't wear a hat that day. So what's one modern thing you think your great-great-grandparents would have been amazed by? So we're talking about your grandmother's or your grandfather's grandparents, your second great-grandparents. So you're looking back, born around late 1800s. So what was one modern thing that you think your great-great-grandparents would have been amazed by? So your second great grandparents would have been born around the 1800s, early 1900s. So your ancestors knew survival skills as well. So if there was a natural disaster that came along, or if they were out walking and got lost or got injured, they knew what to do to keep themselves safe. They all had built-in survival skills. Could you, if you're out walking or hiking and something happens, could you survive? So our ancestors were incredibly resourceful. Could we survive like they did? Try doing one thing the old-fashioned way this week. Bake bread from scratch, hand wash something, make butter from scratch, read by candlelight instead of using screens. So no Kindle, read a real book by candlelight or by lantern. And if you want to learn more about that, just let us know. We're happy to help you come up with that sort of stuff. And life was tougher, but our ancestors had skills we can still learn from today. Whether we'd thrive or struggle, it's fun to imagine stepping into their shoes for a day. So think about that. What sort of things what skills did your ancestors have that you wish that you could do today? That would be really cool to figure that one out, wouldn't it? I want to learn canning. I really do. I want to get right now with bananas. If I get, sometimes the supermarket will have a box of bananas that are on the overripe side. I love those boxes. I come home, I smash them up in two bananas to a pack. I have these reusable silicone bags, so I don't have to use plastic. And these silicone bags can go in the dishwasher or the freezer, the refrigerator, so on the shelf. It doesn't matter. And so I get banana, and little baker's secret. So you get 2 bananas, you mash them together, because most recipes call for 2 bananas. If you're making banana muffins, banana bread, banana cake, banana loaf, whatever you're making with bananas in, it usually calls for 2 bananas. So you smash up the bananas, you put a couple of drops, put about half a teaspoon of vanilla essence in there with it, mix it all up, air seal it tight. So get all the air out of it as you're closing it up, and air seal it tight, store it flat in your freezer. And then when you need to make some banana muffins, some banana bread, some banana cake, and if you're doubling the recipe, you take 2 bags out. You just take it out, let it defrost, and of course at the same time you've got your eggs out, because you need to get good cakes, you need to raise your eggs to room temperature. These are all things I learned from my grandmothers. Yes. See, good thing. I loved hanging out with my grandmothers because I learned things. I learned sewing from one. I learned baking and cooking from the other one. One was very good with the handcrafts, and one was really good in the kitchen. Not that the other one wasn't, but used to be in there. And I learned this trick with the mashed bananas from her. And she says, then you take it out and you let it defrost. Take the eggs out so they can get to room temperature. So basically, any refrigerated goods that you need for the banana cake, you would take out of the fridge for about 30 minutes to an hour before you started making the cake. And you will get the most moist banana cake or banana bread or banana muffins that you could possibly imagine. And that it tastes so good when you use bananas that have been frozen. They've got extra moisture in them. They've got the vanilla essence already in there. I just tell you, using frozen bananas rather than taking bananas from the grocery store and then just smashing them up and using those. Frozen defrosted bananas work so much better in the banana cake recipes than the other ones do. So that's my little helpful hint that I learned from my grandmother. And then my Nana would teach me different sewing tricks and things like that too. So yes, which I learned a lot of sewing from my mom, who learned it from her mom. So with that, what things do you want to go and learn? What things would you like to go and learn that your ancestors did that you don't do today? I want to learn canning. I really do. I want to learn canning. I want to can some fruits. Yeah, can some fruits. That's why I love walking pantries, because you can walk into the pantry and there's your canned fruits all there. I'm not so keen on canned vegetables, but I do like canned fruits like peaches and pears and plums and nectarines, and I'm getting hungry. Anyway, with that, we are out of here. So let us know in the comment. Let's see, what do we put there? Question for today. If you were suddenly transported back to the 1800s or early 1900s, could you survive without the modern conveniences? What skill would be the hardest for you to learn? So let us know in the comments below, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific.